Hello, I'm taking on a challenge to beat every playable Nintendo published game. Welcome to the next episode. The next game is Mario Bros. We are back to the arcade world. Finally, Mario has returned as the main character after serving as the primary antagonist of Donkey Kong Jr., although we've actually already started to see Mario appear as the protagonist in the Game & Watch world prior to this. In addition to seeing him take on the role of a carpenter in Donkey Kong, we've seen Mario take jobs as a worker in a bottling factory and a worker in a cement factory. In this one, we see Mario has changed his occupation once again, and now he's finally moving on to his most well-known occupation, a plumber. Apparently, while considering Mario's appearance as a mustachioed man in overalls, Miyamoto thought being a plumber was a more fitting role than a carpenter. Speaking of, this project was once again headed by Nintendo's popular duo, Miyamoto and Yokoi. When they were initially designing the game, Yokoi proposed to Miyamoto for Mario to no longer take fall damage, which was different from Donkey Kong. Initially, Miyamoto wasn't sure about this idea, and worried that it would make it not much of a game. Eventually though, he decided it would be okay to give Mario superhuman abilities, and designed a prototype that involved Mario bouncing around that he was happy with. It's interesting to see Miyamoto and Yokoi put so much consideration into a mechanic that would eventually become the standard for platformers. Donkey Kong may have laid some of the groundwork for platformers, but it's clear that Mario Bros. Was an important next step for Nintendo, as they experimented a lot more with advanced jumping mechanics this time around. Another interesting thing that came out of the development of this one was that the appearance of what is now an iconic Mario enemy was influenced directly by a core mechanic of the game. You defeat enemies by attacking from below and then above, so they wanted to use creatures that could protect themselves from above to force players to attack from below first. This was their primary motivation as to why they used turtles as an enemy type, which would eventually turn into the Koopa, and even play a part in the eventual appearance of Bowser, the primary antagonist of the Mario franchise and King of the Koopas. Since Mario is a plumber in this one, the game takes place in the sewers. It was because of this setting that we would see the introduction of the iconic green pipes that would become a Mario staple. Miyamoto needed a way for the enemies to inexplicably appear and disappear, so he decided to use pipes to fit the theme. The iconic green color was apparently used because of their limited palette, and Miyamoto thought that the green color helped the pipes stand out. The other big addition here was the addition of a two-player mode that would inspire the game's name. They wanted to add a second player, so they created a palette swap of Mario, gave him the name Luigi, and established him as the brother of Mario. This simple need for a player 2 would spawn one of the most well-known characters in the Mario franchise, and it inspired the name Mario Bros., which became a part of the standard naming convention for 2D Mario games going forward. Now, we technically did see Luigi first appear in the similarly titled, but completely different, Mario Bros. On the Game & Watch multiscreen, but I have a feeling Luigi was initially designed here first, and the Game & Watch game simply came out first due to it being easier to develop. Similar to the Donkey Kong games, the level structure is a bit different between the US and Japanese versions of this one. However, the actual change between the two is very small. Each level in this game uses a preset amount of enemies it sends out, and for some reason, level 2 in the US version was cut out. In Japan, this is an early level that only spawns 4 shell creepers, so I have no idea why it was removed. I once again played both versions of the game, but it was after this one that I decided to stop playing both versions of games with regional variants. The difference here was so minor, and going forward there would be a lot of minor difference between versions of games that don't justify a whole entire new playthrough. If you really want to be pedantic about it, technically even text and voice differences across every translation could count as a change to the game, and there's no way I'm playing each game in every language it was translated to. Alright, let's dive into the actual game. I started with the Japanese version of the game. I only played the single player mode of this one, as that will generally be the content I will focus on in this challenge. By watching the demo though, I still got a glimpse of what the 2-player mode was like and saw Luigi in action. Right when you start up the game, you are introduced to the first enemy of the game, the Shell Creeper. That's right, it's not actually Koopas you face in this game, but their conceptual ancestors, the Shell Creeper. It also plays a quick demo on how to actually defeat a Shell Creeper. You have to jump below it to knock it over, and then go up next to it and knock it out. It's interesting to see an arcade game actually have a tutorial like this, although it does get a bit annoying having to see it every time you start a new game. During this tutorial, Mario Bros. Continues the trend of using classical pieces for its music, as the first movement from Mozart's Eine kleine Nachtmusik is played. Your primary objective in this game is to defeat all the enemies crawling around in the sewers. They come out of the pipes at the top, and you must defeat them in the way described in the tutorial. If you take too long to knock them out after you flip them over, they will climb back into their shell and become much faster. Also, if you're unable to defeat them by the time they reach the bottom, they will exit the stage and reappear at the top later on. After you defeat every enemy but one, the last enemy will change color and become very fast. While the primary way to flip over enemies is to jump and hit the block beneath them, you can also do this using the POW block near the bottom middle of the stage, which will cause all the enemies currently on the ground to flip over. The block has a limited amount of uses, however, and it only gets refreshed every so often. Immediately when I started to play the game, there were two things I noticed. The first was that this game was very slippery. My main previous exposure to this game was through the NES version and the minigame in Super Mario Bros. 3, and I don't think these variations are nearly as slippery as what we have here. Additionally, the footsteps in this game were incredibly squeaky. If you're not a fan of the sound of a squeaky pair of sneakers, this one might be too much for you to handle. While the first level is pretty easy, I realized I didn't configure the machines to give me the maximum amount of lives, so I intentionally lost my lives right away. When you get bit by a shell creeper, it plays a pretty gnarly sound effect. Ugh! He went. In my next run, I beat this level though on my first try. Level 2 is pretty similar, but I did see a new type of enemy. After enough time passes, a red fireball spawns and bounces around the stage. You don't need to defeat them to beat the level, but if they touch you, you lose a life. These fireballs make the game a lot more difficult. You can defeat them by jumping below the blocks when the fireball is at the ground, however they respawn again soon after, and they become much faster on the second spawn, so I'm not really sure it's worth it. Level 3 was once again very similar, and I beat it without a hitch. After this, you are thrown into the first bonus level, Level 4. These levels give you a short time limit to grab all the coins. I haven't talked about it yet, but there are a bunch of coins in this game that'll give you extra points. Looks like there's another Mario staple that originated from this game. Anyway, this first bonus is pretty easy, as it gives you quite a bit of time, but the later bonuses have a much tighter timer, so you have to come up with a pretty good route if you want to get them all. It's not necessary that you beat these bonuses, but they do give you a bunch of points if you clear them, which helps with earning extra lives. After clearing this bonus, you are introduced to the next enemy type, the Sidestepper. These pesky enemies have to be hit twice before they flip over, and they get angry and move faster after the first hit. Level 5 is full of these Sidesteppers. Once again, I beat it on my first try though. This run is going pretty smoothly. Level 6 combines the Sidesteppers with the Shell Creepers, and in this one, I saw another type of fireball enemy. After some time passes, green fireballs will start spawning in the row you're in and make a single trip across the screen horizontally. These fireballs can make things really difficult. Often, you'll want to wait in a single spot to line up a hit with an enemy, but then the fireball comes barreling through and ruins everything. As the levels get more complex, both of these fireball types make the game much more difficult. After level 6 is beaten, the final enemy of the three main types is introduced, the Fighter Fly. While these guys only take one hit to knock over, they jump around the stage, meaning you only have a small window to actually knock them over. These guys are really annoying. I constantly was just barely missing the window to flip them over. Level 7 only includes these enemies, and I lost my first life in this level. I got stuck in the bottom with green fireballs popping up everywhere, and I got singed by one of them. Level 8 includes both Fighter Flies and Sidesteppers, and while I did beat it without losing any lives, the game was starting to get pretty hectic. After this, we are introduced to a new type of enemy, the Slip Ice, later renamed Freezy. These things don't have to be destroyed, but touching them will make you lose a life, and if one reaches the middle of a platform, it will break and make the whole platform get covered in slippery ice. The game is already pretty slippery, so this ice can make the game brutal. Weirdly enough, instead of being thrown into a level with Freezies, you were thrown into a bonus level for level 9. It is covered in ice this time, which maybe explains why they introduced the enemy here. I failed miserably at clearing the bonus this time around. After this is level 10, and here we finally see the Slip Ice enemy. With a new enemy type added, the game was starting to feel so much harder. Physics of this game are just so slippery, and it's really easy to get stuck surrounded by enemies. This is definitely harder than my memories of the NES version. I lost 3 lives to this level, taking out half of my remaining lives. From here on out, the levels start to feel pretty similar. Not every level is the same, each having their own mix of exactly what they throw at you. While I did manage to beat level 11, I lost all my remaining lives to level 12. At this point, I had a dilemma. What should I consider beating this game? This one feels even less clear than most arcade games. There's no ending cutscene, like with the Donkey Kong games, and clearing a single screen doesn't feel like enough, since tons of stuff is introduced as the levels progress. This is definitely one of those cases that exposes just how meaningless beating can actually mean in the context of certain games. This game was not designed with an ending in mind, and it was intended to just be played over and over to beat previous high scores. One thing I occasionally do for games like this is to check speedrun.com to see what other people set as a goal. Interestingly, for this one, the 4 categories are 10 phases, 15 phases, 50,000 points, and 100,000 points. I had already cleared the 10 phase category and the 50,000 point category. It's also worth noting, at this point you're already on top of the default in-game leaderboard scores, which could also be seen as a goal for this game. I was mostly satisfied with the game after seeing this, but I tried giving it a few more runs to see if I could beat those harder categories. Unfortunately, I hit a wall after this. I had a really hard time beating level 12, and the one time I did, I lost to level 13 soon after. After my 6th run, I decided to call it quits on the Japanese version and just switch to the US one. As I said before, this version was basically the same, with one level cut. I made it once again to level 13, which would have actually been level 14 in the Japanese version, and lost my last life here. I decided to stop here, as I had cleared the base speedrun categories and seen every major mechanic the game had. Or had I? While I was writing the script for this video, I discovered that there were a few more mechanics that I had not seen yet. In the US version, I would need to get to level 16 to see every major gameplay mechanic. It didn't feel right to make this video without seeing these mechanics, so I just recently went back to this one to see everything I missed. The first mechanic wouldn't be seen until level 15. It took me a few tries, but after about an hour of playing, I finally managed to get to level 15. This one is a bonus level. The new mechanic here was that after a few seconds, the stage would completely vanish, and you would have to clear the stage from memory. Luckily for me, I nailed it on my first try. With that, I was sent to level 16, which included the final new gameplay mechanic. The top floor was covered in ice. While this alone wouldn't make too much of a difference, the worst part was that icicles would form on the ceiling and occasionally drop. As you might expect, touching these icicles at any point will cost you a life. Unfortunately, I lost my remaining life here. Dang, I wanted to beat a level with the icicles at least once. I gave it one more go, and I did really good this time. I conquered level 16 and even made it all the way to level 20. Finally, at this point, I was satisfied with the game and ended my time with it here. Game complete. On to the review. This one is a bit of a mixed bag for me. On the one hand, it's nice to see Nintendo try something completely new instead of continuing to ride on the coattails of the Donkey Kong games. On the other hand, there are some good things that were lost along the way. While this is more of a personal preference, I miss having an ending to aim towards, and I miss having completely unique levels. Sure, the stage and enemies evolve over time, but I think I would have preferred it if the stages had a few more platform variations. All that being said, I still enjoyed my time with the game. Mario's movement feels far more advanced than in Donkey Kong, and it's interesting to see them move closer towards the 2D Mario physics engine that would become a staple for the franchise. The core gameplay loop works well here too, and the way they have incorporated the jumping mechanics into how you defeat the enemies is pretty clever. I do wish they toned down the amount of fireballs they send at you though, and the physics do feel a bit more slippery than I would like. All in all, it's a decent time, and I gave the game a 6 out of 10. Thanks for watching the video. If you want to see more of these in the future, make sure you subscribe to the channel so you won't miss out on the next one. Also leave a like if you enjoyed it, since it'll help the channel grow and motivate me to continue this series. I hope I will see you in the next step of my quest to beat every Nintendo game.